The file arrived on my desk under the stark red urgency flag, a classification typically reserved for imminent national security threats or high-profile federal cases demanding immediate, top-level attention. As an assistant United States attorney within the Civil Rights Division, specializing in animal welfare litigation and the complex enforcement of the Americans with Disabilities Act ADA, I've unfortunately become accustomed to confronting cruelty and systemic injustice. Yet, the contents of this particular file, meticulously compiled and forwarded by our division's intake specialists, cross-referenced with a disturbing pattern of frantic calls logged at veterans advocacy groups, outlined a situation so maliciously calculated, so venomously steeped in prejudice. It made my blood run cold despite the sterile chill of the federal building. The case concerned Patriots Landing, a sprawling, relatively new suburban development deliberately marketed towards military families due to its proximity to the gates of Fort Connors Army Base. The narrative centered on a decorated combat veteran, Sergeant David Rourke, his certified service animal, a calm and devoted dog named Brutus, and a relentless campaign of persecution allegedly waged by the neighborhood's powerful homeowners association president, a woman named Meredith Holloway, a key and clearly inflammatory detail was noted with emphasis early in the report. Brutus was an American pit bull terrier, and Meredith Holloway, already dubbed HOA Karen with palpable fear and disgust in the attached witness summaries meticulously compiled by horrified neighbors, was reportedly engaged in a systematic effort to fabricate evidence, falsely declare Brutus rabid and dangerous, and push relentlessly through local channels for the dog to be seized and ultimately euthanized. My professional life often involves seeking justice for the voiceless, both human and animal. This case wasn't just crying out for intervention, it was screaming for the full weight and authority of the United States Department of Justice. Patriots Landing. Despite its evocative name intended to conjure images of camaraderie and mutual support, seemed, under Meredith Holloway's autocratic reign, less about patriotic unity and more about rigid, enforced conformity. Preliminary background checks, run swiftly by our paralegals, revealed Holloway's documented, long-standing obsession with superficial community aesthetics and, more pointedly, her particular, almost pathological prejudice against pit bull-type dogs. She had previously spearheaded several unsuccessful, divisive attempts to amend the HOA bylaws to ban the breed entirely within the community, citing long-debunked myths about inherent aggression and unpredictable danger. She was known to circulate fear-mongering flyers filled with sensationalized anecdotes, often anonymously, post selectively edited videos of neighborhood dogs barking online, and generally foster an atmosphere of suspicion and hostility towards any dog that didn't fit her preferred mold of small, fluffy, and perpetually silent, her own house. Multiple neighbors reported with a mixture of fear and resentment. Resembled a miniature surveillance state, bristling with excessive security cameras pointed outwards towards the street and adjacent properties. She was infamous for her frequent patrols of the neighborhood, clipboard clutched like a scepter, meticulously documenting perceived infractions, a trash bin left out an hour too long, lawn grass exceeding regulation height by a quarter-inch, holiday decorations displayed past the approved date with obsessive, punitive zeal. She represented the nadir of HOA overreach, power derived not from genuine community service or consensus, but from the arbitrary enforcement of petty rules, amplified and distorted by deep-seated personal biases. Into this tightly wound, surveilled environment, approximately 6 months prior to the file landing on my desk, moved Sergeant David Rourke, David was navigating the difficult, often isolating transition back to civilian life after 3 grueling combat tours in Afghanistan. He was honorably discharged, but carried the invisible, heavy burdens of war, a formal diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, severe chronic anxiety, debilitating night terrors, and intermittent but significant mobility challenges stemming from shrapnel injuries sustained during an IED attack. Brutus was not merely a pet, he was an indispensable lifeline, a crucial component of David's medical treatment and daily functioning. A meticulously trained and formally certified service animal, Brutus had been provided to David through a highly reputable National Veterans Support Organization specializing in pairing service dogs with wounded warriors. Brutus performed specific, documented tasks critical to David's stability and ability to navigate the world, utilizing his highly attuned senses to detect the subtle physiological cues preceding David's debilitating panic attacks, providing immediate deep pressure therapy by leaning his solid weight against David to ground him during episodes, physically nudging David awake from the grip of paralyzing nightmares, offering steadying balance support on days when David's leg injuries flared, preventing falls, and providing the constant, non-judgmental, grounding companionship that allowed David to leave his house, interact with his community, and slowly begin rebuilding a life shattered by war. Neighbors, initially perhaps cautious or curious due to Brutus's breed, a reaction Holloway had actively cultivated, were reportedly quickly won over by the dog's actual demeanor. Brutus, always impeccably leashed and often wearing his clearly marked official service vest when outside David's property, was consistently, demonstrably, impeccably behaved. He was calm in public spaces, quiet unless alerting David as trained, remarkably gentle and patient with neighborhood children who inevitably approached him in the local park, always with David's careful supervision, and generally indifferent to other dogs unless specifically commanded by David to interact politely. He was, by all credible accounts, a furry, 4-legged refutation of every negative stereotype Meredith Holloway relentlessly promoted, a living embodiment of the breed's potential for loyalty and gentleness when properly raised, trained, and loved. Several neighbors quietly made a point of greeting David and Brutus warmly during walks, offering small gestures of support, a friendly wave, a compliment on Brutus's good behavior, subtle counterpoints to the chill emanating from Holloway's direction, and that inherent contradiction, that visible challenge to her prejudiced worldview, seemed utterly intolerable to Meredith Holloway. From the very moment David and Brutus moved into Patriot's Landing, she allegedly targeted them with escalating hostility. The campaign began, as it often does in such cases, with anonymous, unsigned notes left tucked under David's door, vaguely referencing intimidating animals and neighborhood safety concerns. When David ignored these, recognizing them likely originated from Holloway, she escalated to formal HOA violation notices citing increasingly fabricated incidents. Brutus supposedly seen running loose off-leash, immediately disproven by time-stamped footage from David's own doorbell security camera. Brutus allegedly barking excessively at all hours, directly contradicted by written statements from immediate adjacent neighbors confirming his quiet nature. Brutus accused of defecating inappropriately on common property, countered by David's established reputation for meticulously cleaning up after his dog, often carrying extra waste bags. David, though weary of conflict and struggling with his own anxieties, patiently and correctly responded to each formal notice. He provided copies of Brutus's official service animal certification, letters from his Veterans Affairs VA doctors clearly explaining the medical necessity of the service animal under the provisions of the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Fair Housing Act, and specific evidence refuting each baseless complaint. Meredith Holloway contemptuously dismissed it all. That so-called certification means absolutely nothing to this HOA. She reportedly snapped at him during one particularly ugly confrontation she initiated on his front lawn. Witnessed by a concerned neighbor peering through blinds, pit bulls are inherently dangerous, unstable animals. It's genetics. They snap without warning. It is only a matter of time before this one attacks someone, a child, another pet. Me. It represents an unacceptable risk and does not belong in a family-oriented neighborhood like Patriots Landing, she then demanded, exceeding any legitimate HOA authority. That Brutus be muzzled at all times when outdoors, perpetually confined indoors, or, preferably, removed entirely from the community. When David Rourke, understanding his rights and refusing to relinquish the essential medical support Brutus provided, stood firm. Citing the specific protections afforded to him and Brutus under the ADA and FHA, Meredith's campaign shifted from mere harassment and intimidation to outright, calculated fabrication of evidence. This was the critical juncture where her actions crossed unequivocally into federal jurisdiction, triggering the involvement of my office. According to multiple, consistent witness statements from increasingly concerned neighbors, and corroborated by David's own terrified, detailed accounts provided to the Veterans Advocacy Group, Meredith began actively attempting to manufacture evidence of Brutus's supposed aggression. She allegedly tried repeatedly to provoke Brutus during his daily walks with David, attempting to startle him by suddenly appearing from behind bushes or using high-frequency dog whistles, clearly hoping to elicit any reaction she could capture on her ever-present smartphone camera. She was observed taking numerous photos of Brutus from distorted angles, deliberately trying to make him appear menacing or aggressive when he was simply resting calmly on David's porch. One particularly disturbed neighbor provided a sworn statement detailing an incident where she witnessed Meredith scattering pieces of torn, bloody-looking fabric near David's property line late one night, strongly suspecting an attempt to plant evidence for a false claim that Brutus had attacked another animal or destroyed property. Simultaneously, Meredith escalated her official complaints, now directly targeting local animal control services. She began filing repeated reports, grossly embellishing minor, everyday incidents. Brutus barking a single time at a passing delivery truck was described in her official complaint as a sustained, vicious, aggressive assault showing predatory intent. The animal control officers, thankfully familiar with both service animal laws and, increasingly, with Meredith Holloway's pattern of baseless complaints, conducted the mandatory welfare checks triggered by her reports. They repeatedly found Brutus to be calm, healthy, well cared for, and exhibiting no signs of aggression whatsoever. They meticulously documented his service animal certifications and David's consistent compliance with all local leash laws and ordinances. On their third visit, prompted by yet another of Meredith's escalating claims, they formally warned her, on record, about the legal penalties associated with filing false reports and harassing the owner of a legitimate service animal. This official dismissal by the very authorities she sought to manipulate, however, seemed not to deter Meredith, but rather to harden her resolve and fuel her vindictive obsession. If the established system wouldn't eliminate the perceived threat based on her increasingly frantic word, she would circumvent the system. She would create her own undeniable proof, the tipping point. The act that triggered the urgent federal intervention came swiftly and terrifyingly just days before the file reached my desk. Meredith Holloway, bypassing the now skeptical Animal Control Agency entirely, filed an emergency ex parte petition directly with a local magistrate court. In her sworn petition, she alleged a vicious, entirely unprovoked attack upon her person by Brutus. She claimed the dog had lunged at her savagely during her morning walk near David's property, tearing her sleeve and inflicting minor scratches on her arm. Photographs attached showed superficial skin abrasions, conveniently located and in a pattern forensic experts would later deem highly inconsistent with a typical dog bite or attack. She produced the dramatically torn sleeve of an expensive jacket as physical evidence. She submitted a lengthy, signed, notarized affidavit filled with lurid, sensationalized descriptions of the alleged attack, Brutus's supposed rabid behavior, and her profound fear for her life and the safety of the community. Crucially, and most damningly, she included in her petition a signed, notarized statement allegedly from another Patriots Landing resident, purportedly corroborating her account and claiming to have witnessed the entire violent attack. Our initial rapid investigation strongly suggested this witness statement was either coerced under duress or, more likely, entirely forged. Based solely on this skillfully fabricated package of evidence, the sworn affidavit filled with lies, the questionable photos, the torn clothing, the likely fraudulent witness statement, presented with a performance of hysterical urgency and victimhood, Meredith Holloway successfully convinced the local magistrate, perhaps one less familiar with the intricacies of ADA service animal protections, or simply swayed by the dramatic presentation of an apparently terrified HOA president, to issue an emergency court order. Brutus was summarily declared a dangerous animal posing an imminent threat to public safety. The order mandated local animal control to seize Brutus immediately for mandatory quarantine and rabies observation, pending a formal hearing, a hearing Meredith clearly intended to dominate with more lies and manufactured hysteria. The order strongly indicated euthanasia was the likely, and in her view, necessary outcome. The execution of the seizure itself was, according to David's heartbreaking account, profoundly traumatic. Animal control officers, legally bound by the magistrate's court order, despite their own documented reservations about Meredith's credibility, arrived at David Rourke's home without warning. David, utterly confused, horrified, and powerless against the legal document they presented, couldn't stop them. Brutus, instinctively sensing his owner's extreme distress but remaining characteristically calm and non-reactive, was leashed and led away by strangers towards the sterile, frightening environment of the county animal shelter's quarantine wing. David was left standing alone on his porch, devastated, terrified, his vital support system, his link to stability, abruptly ripped away based on a foundation of calculated lies. He described feeling the familiar, icy tendrils of his PTSD immediately tightening around him, the world suddenly tilting, becoming unsafe, hostile, and overwhelmingly threatening once more. But Meredith Holloway, in her arrogant pursuit of perceived order and prejudiced purity, had profoundly underestimated the character of the community she claimed to protect, and she had certainly underestimated the quiet dignity of Sergeant David Rourke and the deep loyalty Brutus inspired in those who actually knew him. Neighbors who had personally witnessed Meredith's escalating harassment campaign, who knew Brutus not as the monster she portrayed but as the gentle, well-behaved giant he truly was, were appalled and galvanized by the seizure. They didn't just gossip, they acted. They rallied around David immediately, offering support, sharing information. They meticulously documented everything they had witnessed, dates, times, specific incidents of Meredith's provocations, their own positive interactions with Brutus, They bombarded the animal control director and the magistrate's office with calls and emails, protesting the seizure, attesting passionately to Brutus's true nature and David's responsible ownership. And, crucially, several of these concerned neighbors, working in coordination with the National Veterans Advocacy Group David had contacted in desperation, escalated the issue beyond local channels. They compiled a comprehensive dossier, detailed accounts of Meredith's harassment, photos and videos of Brutus behaving gently with children and other animals, copies of Meredith's escalating HOA violation notices, Brutus's service animal certifications, David's VA documentation confirming his disability and need for the animal, and sworn affidavits contradicting Meredith's claims. They sent this dossier directly to state civil rights enforcement agencies and, ultimately, electronically, flagged for urgency to my office, the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice. That's how the red-flagged file, detailing a conspiracy of malice and fraud targeting a disabled veteran and his service animal, landed with such force on my desk. Reading through the meticulously compiled witness statements, David's heartbreaking personal account, the veterinary reports confirming Brutus's excellent health and stable temperament, the official ADA documentation, and contrasting it sharply with Meredith Holloway's increasingly frantic, demonstrably fraudulent complaints, and the questionable emergency court order she had deceitfully obtained. The pattern was stark, egregious, and undeniable. This wasn't merely an HOA dispute gone sour. This was a calculated, malicious scheme potentially involving federal crimes, wire fraud using phone and internet communications to transmit false information and complaints, mail fraud using the Postal Service to send fraudulent documents and HOA notices, perjury lying in sworn affidavits, and potentially coercing or forging witness statements, conspiracy to violate civil rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and a deliberate, cruel attempt to cause severe emotional distress and deprive a disabled veteran of his necessary, life-altering medical support, culminating in a concrete attempt to have his certified service animal killed under false pretenses. The federal nexus wasn't just present, it was clear, compelling, and demanded immediate action. Get me Special Agent Thorne on a secure line. I instructed my assistant curtly, referring to Marcus Thorne, the FBI supervisory special agent, who often led our division's most complex civil rights and financial fraud investigations, and initiate immediate coordination protocols with the U.S. Marshals Service. We need to move on this immediately. That dog is on borrowed time, and Sergeant Rourke is in crisis. Within hours, leveraging the priority status of the case, we had assembled a dedicated federal task force. Agent Thorne's FBI team moved with impressive speed, rapidly corroborating the critical evidence provided in the dossier. They conducted swift, discreet interviews with key neighbors who confirmed Meredith's escalating vendetta and Brutus's consistently gentle nature. They obtained time-stamped security footage from several nearby homes that directly disproved Meredith's earlier claims of Brutus running loose or acting aggressively at specific times she had cited. Most crucially, they secured a sworn, videotaped affidavit from the neighbor whose signature Meredith had allegedly forged on the witness statement submitted to the magistrate. The neighbor tearfully confirmed she had not witnessed any attack, had explicitly refused Meredith's persistent pressure to lie, and was horrified to learn her name had been fraudulently attached to the document. Concurrently, our team consulted with renowned forensic veterinarians who analyzed the photographs of Meredith's supposed injuries, unanimously deeming them inconsistent with any known pattern of canine bites or scratches, and noting features suggestive of self-infliction or manipulation. Armed with this rapidly accumulating, overwhelming evidence, We presented our case to a federal magistrate judge, emphasizing the imminent threat to Brutus's life and the ongoing violation of Sergeant Rourke's civil rights. We obtained sealed federal warrants, a comprehensive arrest warrant for Meredith Holloway, detailing multiple felony counts, including wire fraud, perjury, witness tampering, and conspiracy to violate civil rights under 18 U.S.C. 241 and 242 detailed search warrants for her residence and electronic devices, seeking further evidence of the fabricated evidence. Financial transactions related to the scheme, possible payments for false testimony or evidence tampering, and communications revealing conspiracy, and, most urgently, a federal seizure warrant, citing the ADA and federal supremacy, explicitly ordering the immediate release of the service animal, known as Brutus, from county quarantine directly into the custody of his owner, Sergeant David Rourke, thereby legally superseding the local magistrate's improperly obtained emergency order. Time remained absolutely critical. We received intelligence from sympathetic sources within animal control that the county's mandatory quarantine period was set to expire the following morning, and Meredith Holloway was lobbying aggressively, calling elected officials and the shelter director, demanding Brutus's euthanasia be carried out immediately upon the quarantine's conclusion. Likely before David could secure legal representation and mount a proper challenge in state court, our federal intervention had to be swift, decisive, and perfectly timed. We made the tactical decision to execute the arrest and search warrants simultaneously with the service of the federal seizure warrant for Brutus. One heavily armed team, led by Agent Thorne and including myself to oversee the operation and handle the legal aspects on scene, would proceed directly to Meredith Holloway's residence at dawn. A second team, composed of U.S. Marshals and accompanied by a veterinary technician from the Veterans Support Group, would proceed concurrently to the county animal shelter with the notarized federal warrant ordering Brutus's immediate release to Sergeant Rourke, who would meet them there. We coordinated discreetly with a trusted local television news outlet known for responsible reporting, ensuring a single camera crew would be present near Holloway's residence, not to create a media circus, but to transparently document the lawful enforcement of federal civil rights law and the public exposure of this egregious abuse of power. In cases like this, sunlight truly is the best disinfectant. We arrived at Meredith Holloway's heavily surveilled, immaculately landscaped house just as the first rays of dawn painted the sky. The neighborhood was quiet, still, as Agent Thorne and several other FBI agents, clearly identified by their vests, approached her front door. Meredith Holloway opened it preemptively, already dressed in sharp business attire, a look of smug, vindictive triumph etched on her face. She was likely expecting confirmation that her scheme had reached its conclusion, that Brutus had been destroyed. Her expression shifted rapidly through confusion to visible alarm as she registered the FBI vests, the number of agents, and my unmistakable presence, an assistant United States attorney, flanked by federal agents, standing on her meticulously swept doorstep. Meredith Holloway, Agent Thorne stated formally, his voice calm but resonant. Yes. What is the meaning of this? She demanded, attempting to regain control, puffing herself up with indignation. MAAM. I'm Supervisory Special Agent Thorne, FBI. This, he gestured towards me, is Assistant U.S. Attorney Liam O'Connell from the Department of Justice. Thorne held up the folded arrest warrant. We have a federal warrant for your arrest. The blood visibly drained from Meredith's face, leaving her complexion chalky beneath her makeup. Arrest. Federal. This is utterly absurd. It must be about the dog, isn't it? That vicious pit bull. I was attacked. I have medical proof. The court order. I was protecting this community from a clear danger. Her voice rose, becoming strident. No, Mrs. Holloway. I stepped forward then, my voice intentionally cold, precise, devoid of any negotiation or pleasantry. You were not attacked. You fabricated evidence. You committed perjury in a sworn affidavit. You filed multiple false reports to authorities. You tampered with a witness. You conspired to fraudulently cause the seizure and planned euthanasia of a certified service animal, essential to the health and well-being of a decorated combat veteran. Each accusation was delivered like a hammer blow, distinct and legally potent. You willfully violated the Americans with Disabilities Act. You violated federal law. You terrorized Sergeant Rourke. You abused your position, and you lied. I paused, letting the weight of the words settle. The charges against you include conspiracy to violate civil rights, wire fraud, perjury, and witness tampering. You are under arrest. Lies. It's all lies, she shrieked, her carefully constructed composure finally shattering completely as two agents moved smoothly to take her arms and apply handcuffs. That beast is dangerous. I am the victim here. You're protecting a monster. You're persecuting me for upholding neighborhood standards. She began to struggle, no longer the imperious HOA president, but a cornered perpetrator lashing out. Neighbors, drawn by the commotion, emerged onto their lawns, phones instantly raised, recording the scene. The news crew, positioned discreetly down the street, zoomed in, capturing the raw, unfiltered downfall of their neighborhood tyrant. Her carefully crafted image imploded under the harsh light of federal justice. As Meredith Holloway was being firmly but professionally led away in handcuffs towards an awaiting federal vehicle, still spewing incoherent denials and accusations towards the rolling cameras, my secure phone buzzed. It was the team leader from the animal shelter. His voice was filled with relief. Brutus is safe and clear, Mr. O'Connell. He's out of quarantine. Sergeant Rourke is with him now. Reunion confirmed. A wave of profound relief, mingled with deep satisfaction, washed over me. The most critical part of the operation was successful. The reunion between Sergeant David Rourke and Brutus at the shelter, also captured respectfully by news crews alerted by the jubilant neighbors and the veterans group, was intensely emotional and profoundly moving. Brutus, though slightly thinner and clearly bewildered by his sudden confinement in the noisy shelter environment, erupted in joyous, whole body wags upon seeing David, pressing against the kennel door, emitting soft whimpers of recognition. As soon as the door was opened under the authority of the federal warrant, Brutus surged forward, not with aggression, but with pure, unadulterated devotion, gently licking David's face, leaning his solid weight against him. The familiar pressure therapy instinctively offered. David knelt on the concrete floor, burying his face in Brutus's thick, soft fur, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. He wasn't just hugging his dog, he was hugging his lifeline, his stability, his security. For David, that moment wasn't just relief, it felt like the world, which had tilted back towards chaos and danger, suddenly righting itself. It was the tangible return of safety, the reaffirmation of a bond forged in shared trauma and unwavering loyalty, a powerful flicker of restored faith, not just in his service animal, but perhaps, tentatively, in the possibility that help could arrive, that justice could prevail even against calculated malice. That single, powerful image, the tearful veteran reunited with his gentle pit bull service dog, became as viral and defining as the footage of Meredith Holloway's arrest. The case, predictably, generated nationwide outrage and became a potent flashpoint for multiple interconnected issues. Discriminatory breed-specific legislation (BSL) faced renewed, intense challenges across the country, with Brutus's story serving as powerful, visceral evidence against harmful, ineffective breed bans. Veterans advocacy groups seized the opportunity to highlight the critical, often life-saving importance of service animals for individuals with disabilities, particularly PTSD, and called for stronger, more consistent enforcement of the ADA. Animal rights and welfare organizations condemned the calculated cruelty and fraud involved in Meredith's scheme, using the case to educate the public about responsible ownership and the true nature of pit bull-type dogs. Meredith Holloway became the unwilling, infamous poster child for malicious HOA overreach, unchecked personal prejudice, and the devastating consequences of targeting vulnerable individuals and their essential support animals. The federal prosecution against Meredith Holloway was swift, thorough, and decisive. Faced with the mountain of irrefutable evidence meticulously assembled by the FBI, the forensic analysis debunking her fabricated injuries, the damning testimony of the neighbor whose signature she forged, financial records potentially showing payments for fabricated evidence or attempts to influence witnesses, her own incriminating emails and computer files revealing the calculated, long-term nature of her scheme, plus the powerful, credible testimonies of Sergeant Rourke, numerous neighbors, and the animal control officers she had repeatedly misled, Meredith's defense crumbled entirely. After conferring with her attorneys, she ultimately accepted a plea agreement to the most serious federal charges, avoiding a potentially even longer sentence after a trial jury conviction. The presiding federal judge, a no-nonsense former military prosecutor herself, delivered a blistering sentencing speech before formally accepting the plea. She condemned Holloway's calculated, despicable cruelty, her profound disrespect for a veteran's honorable service and sacrifice, her arrogant and dangerous manipulation of both state and federal legal systems, and her actions fueled by irrational prejudice and a grotesque abuse of minor community authority. Meredith Holloway was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison, to be followed by several years of stringent supervised release, during which she was explicitly barred by court order from ever serving on any HOA board or similar community governance body, and permanently prohibited from owning or residing with animals. Additionally, as part of the plea agreement and subsequent civil judgments, she was ordered to pay substantial restitution directly to Sergeant David Rourke to cover his legal fees, therapy costs associated with the severe emotional distress inflicted, and other related damages. Hefty federal fines were also imposed. Civil asset forfeiture proceedings were initiated by my office, ensuring she lost her house in Patriots Landing and any significant remaining wealth, representing the ultimate material price for her reign of suburban terror and targeted persecution. The Patriots Landing Homeowners Association, facing ruinous lawsuits from David Rourke and potentially other residents alleging negligence and complicity, was forced into temporary state receivership. It eventually restructured under entirely new leadership, composed largely of the very neighbors who had rallied to support David, with bylaws fundamentally rewritten to ensure strict compliance with the ADA and FHA explicit protections against breed discrimination, and robust mechanisms for resident oversight and accountability. The discriminatory breed-specific restrictions Meredith had championed were permanently, irrevocably removed from their covenants. Sergeant David Rourke, with the unwavering, calming presence of Brutus constantly by his side, found himself an unlikely but remarkably eloquent public advocate. He began speaking out, sharing his story at veterans events, disability rights conferences, and animal welfare fundraisers, raising awareness about the critical role of service animals, challenging harmful breed stereotypes, and advocating for stronger legal protections against harassment and discrimination. Brutus, far from being euthanized as Meredith had viciously intended, became a beloved local figure, a furry ambassador for responsible ownership and gentle strength, living proof that a dog's character isn't defined by its breed or appearance, but by its individual temperament, training, and the unwavering loyalty in its heart. For me, Liam O'Connell, Assistant U.S. Attorney, the case served as yet another stark, sobering reminder that prejudice wears many insidious masks, sometimes hiding behind the veneer of civic concern. Community standards, or misguided notions of safety. It powerfully reaffirmed the critical importance of federal civil rights laws, like the Americans with Disabilities Act, in protecting vulnerable individuals from discrimination and ensuring their right to live full, independent lives. It underscored the absolute necessity of using the full force and authority of the Department of Justice to combat calculated cruelty and injustice, whether directed at human beings or the devoted animals who serve them so faithfully, often providing a lifeline back from the brink. Seeing Sergeant David Rourke walking freely and confidently through his neighborhood months later, head held high, with Brutus trotting calmly, attentively, reassuringly by his side, that was the truest measure of victory. Not just a conviction secured or a prison sentence imposed, but peace restored, dignity defended, and justice, finally, delivered.